Hello and welcome to the Node Foundation CTC meeting for the 22nd of March 2016. We are live streaming. This is my first live stream, which I'm just going to check is actually going live. Yes, it is. I'm going to turn my voice off now. Hang on a second. There we go. Good. So we don't quite have a quorum to make decisions, but we're going to have a quick chat. We've got a very light agenda. So first of all, let's get into a stand-up. So who here is first?
That's me. Not much besides the usual issue and PR review. I don't think there has been anything else. And next up would be Ben.
Hey, also not much to report. We received a couple of security issues, but nothing critical so far. And besides that, it's just the usual. Let's see who's next. That would be Colin is not on the call, I believe. Evan, Francisca, Jeremiah, James.
No, it's actually Nikita.
Oh, it's Nikita, sorry.
I was mostly available the last week, so nothing from me. Which the next one is James.
Past few days have been primarily near-form onboarding for me, but I have landed a few PRs and have split the buffer PR that does the pending deprecation and the random fill. Also working on a few other things like the around the URL parser and that kind of stuff. But other than that, it's been a pretty light week. So next is, I'm trying to find the list. Josh.
Yeah, not too much. Typical issue triage. I actually need to catch up on a couple PRs. And there's a diag meeting. I'd like to get that in on Thursday. Next is Michael Dawson. Oh, he's not here. So Julian, Michael, Brian White.
Pretty much more of the same. Optimizations. Other than that, just normal PR review and commenting on issues. The next, I think, is Miles.
Hey everyone, so we got out 481 and 610.1 today. Last night, while prepping the releases, I cut the 100th version of Sitcam. So we've done 100 releases. A lot of those have just been updating the lookup table. And this week I'm attending TC39 with Brad, and I can give some updates about what's gone on today. People are interested later. Next up after me, Ali is not here and Jen is not here, so on to Rod.
Right. Nothing major from me, just a little bit of infrastructure stuff. Really nothing else to mention. Next would be not Sheki, not Steam. Is Michael here? Michael Dazo. Saktapian.
Nothing much this week. Just some reviews,
Trevor.
that's it. Yeah.
Did we have Trevor? No, Trevor didn't join. Oh,
No, Trevor's here, but he's muted.
Oh, sorry, am I up?
Yep,
Yep.
now you can hear you.
All right, the async hooks PR. So anything worth mentioning. Also, breaking off one or two commits from that and applying those separately per request. If we do have time before the meeting's over, I would like to discuss that PR for just a moment. That's it for me. Next is Rich.
I did fix some flaky tests. I increased test coverage here and there. Helped some first-time contributors. Let's get started with this meeting.
Okay. Okay, so we've got two things on the agenda now. So we've got the buffer constructor API changes. There's been a lot of discussion about this. Got to try and make a decision before version 8. So we'll get into that. Then there's the stable module API, or stable ABI module API. We'll do a bit of a chat about that as well. We've got a guest to join us to talk about that. And then, so we'll just do quickly previous meeting review. Symbol key props, visible inspection divided by default has been landed. The updating the copyright, it's been moved to CTC review because there's no real updates there. We'll bring it back on when there's something to say about it, but things move pretty slowly at the legal end. And I've also submitted, just FYI, submitted another legal question to the board coming out of the last TSC meeting about copyright dates. So that hopefully we'll get something about that soon. And the TC39 plus Node.js Summit dinner, that was for awareness. Is that already passed? Or that's coming up? No, TC39. Oh, this was the. Sorry. Okay. Yes.
Apparently.
It's just for anyways. Okay, so let's just dive into it and get into buffer. Who is brave enough to lead this? Is this something that you want to lead, Nikito, or Rich?
I'm sorry, Nikita, are you gonna lead this?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. All right.
I can kind of talk to it a little bit. There's a couple of different things here that need to be decided on, and there's a longer term issue, and then there's what we need to do for 8.0.0 issue. The short term issue for 8.0.0 is, we have two PRs that I opened. One that introduces a random fill when the buffer module is first loaded, a random character, random byte is selected. And then on new buffer num or buffer num, it uses that to fill that and initialize that memory, as opposed to zero filling by default. That's the first PR. The second PR is a pending deprecation command line flag and a conditional warning for the buffer num or the buffer constructor. It basically is off by default unless this pending deprecation flag is used. The goal there is to make it possible to output a deprecation warning if one wants to, but that that would be hidden by default. Those are the more immediate term things. Rich notes in the chat that there are 5 options. They're not all mutually exclusive, and it makes it a bit more complicated. Thank you for summarizing those in the chat.
Actually, I'm just going to verbally blurt them out if that's okay, because it'll just go faster than typing them. So one is the pending deprecation flag, which you just mentioned, which seems uncontroversial and seems like well, I shouldn't say it seems uncontroversial, because there are people who have expressed opposition to it, but there's far more support for it than opposition. Then there's whether or not we should schedule a runtime deprecation, without the flag. Whether we should schedule that for version 9, announce that will happen in version 9 or version 10 or something. That's more controversial, I think it's fair to say. There's also zero filling, which has a surprising amount of support, given that I don't know. Well, I'll let someone else speak to that. And then related to zero filling, there's random filling. So those are the 3rd and 4th options. And now I'm not seeing a 5th option, so I'm wondering if I made that up. If there's actually
5th option would be do nothing.
No, there's no support for that. Let's see. Give me just a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, well, there's the fifth option of whether. Yeah, no, actually, there's just those 4 things, and like I said, they're not mutual. Except for random fill versus zero fill, they're not mutually exclusive. Like, and they can happen in any combination. So only 4
Actually, it kind of seems like the pending deprecation, like the first category. Should we schedule a runtime deprecation? And when pending deprecation assumes that we are gonna at some point deprecate it. So it's kind of
right, but that's no. But the issue with scheduling is not saying that it will be deprecated at some point in the future. It's determining now at this time what that point will be. Like it's saying we're going to do it in version 9 versus we're going to do it at some point in the future.
Yeah, but the zero and random filling, those imply that we will never deprecate it.
Not necessarily. Yeah, it's we can put the pending deprecation and do the zero fill random fill as that's our mitigation for right now, and leave it open-ended when we would actually do a regular deprecation, or we can say by 10 we're going to do that deprecation. So those.
And I think I'd add that there are definitely people who feel that we should never deprecate this or cannot ever deprecate it without a flag.
So in that case, the pending deprecation would be the most we would ever be able to do.
Rod's asking why random fill was suggested. Since Anna proposed it, maybe she can give a quick explanation.
Right. Okay. So, Nikita had the good comeback to people suggesting that we zero fill. That it would be bad if people came to rely on that. For example, if we started zero filling in version 8, and people saw that new buffer would return zero filled memory and started to rely on that, which is not true for older versions of Node. Like the 4 or 6 release lines, or even if we were to backport it, the previous releases. And random fill would pretty much not run that risk of people coming to rely on that particular behavior. I'd actually be curious from the people who were in favor of zero filling but against random filling, what their reasons were. I think Trevor is in this meeting of all of them.
I don't see that. I'm sorry. I can see how it might partly solve it. That people would not get the zeroed memory, but it would still. People would presumably a lot of people would know that they're getting non-memory chunks, like random or zero. They know they're getting something safe. So
okay.
You still might rely on it.
Well, Nikita did reply with that too. It's true, but I think it's just not like it's on a different order of magnitude.
Yeah,
I think if people weren't worried about, if people felt that they could rely on that, discussing deprecating buffer, like the whole point of the new API was a huge workaround about the fact about backporting, right? I can kind of see the reasoning for the random zero fill. Personally, I don't care enough where if it makes some people feel fluffy to random fill it, then cool. But also, I think it really shouldn't be necessary if we can say we can zero fill them backport. That should be enough, right?
Yeah. So I'm kind of on the fence with regards to the random fill. You know, it's good in that it functionally is no different than getting uninitialized memory. You still have to write over it for it to be useful. So in that sense, it's good that people aren't going to rely on it being zero. But it still suffers from the same problem, the same fundamental problem. People are going to come to rely on it. So I don't see it as being a huge advantage. It is slightly slower. than the zero filling, which actually could be an advantage because it slows down new buffer enough to give people a really good motivation for going to buffer alloc or buffer alloc unsafe, which are significantly faster. So that's then honestly that is a consideration. So
now with the random fill, as far as I understand, it was random fill now to make people feel fluffy, but down the line we can move it to zero fill. Because in the long run, I would like to see it mirror the U8 array more.
Yeah.
And random filling definitely doesn't fit that.
yeah,
Is that anybody else's understanding?
I would prefer zero fill for certain reasons.
Yeah, I agree. Zero fill, and yeah, I don't know about backporting, but I'm not sold on the random filling at all. I'm not. I wouldn't hold up if people felt strongly enough that's a good thing to do, but doesn't sound like it.
But what about Nikita's argument of people starting to depend on zero filling?
Right. I would pretty much oppose like starting to zero fill and not backporting that.
Well, so we could. It is a pending deprecation, so the signal not to use it will have, well, in theory, would eventually be a message being printed out. Don't use this constructor.
Yeah, but our previous runtime deprecation with buffer was a problem that we had to revert, and there's not any indication, or at least what I hear from Nikita is there's not any indication that there's been significant decrease in buffer usage in the ecosystem since we did that reversion. Therefore, we need to either need to, three choices, right? We can just decide that we're gonna, people are gonna be mad and that's okay. We're gonna deprecate, or we're never gonna deprecate, or we have to find some other way to reduce the usage in the ecosystem so we can hopefully, possibly, maybe get to a point where we can deprecate before, I die.
Well, we could do it. We could deprecate a version of the constructor, like a version that has maybe the version that just takes an integer. We could deprecate that one.
We get into some issues there with Trevor, I'll let you explain it. I think you were not going to say the same thing.
Well, I wanted to make a clarification with everyone just to make sure we're on the same page. So say version 8 comes out, 8.0, and then 8.1 comes out. Do we consider 8.0 still supported, or is that like no longer supported and we don't care about
it? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Okay, so if
we only care about the major number.
Yeah, like if we zero fill and then we say, okay, we will backport zero fill to all previous supported versions, then what is the concern about people being able to rely on a zero fill if they are on a release that is no longer supported?
I mean, the question is not like do we support this. The question is are we doing what's best and safest for the ecosystem? Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Also, people that are running an already released release, as for example, someone that's on 4.5, will never see a zero fill buffer, even if you backport it to the V4 branch.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So someone running an already released version. So I took 4.5 as an example. So even if we backport to the V4 branch, people running an already released release, or for example, people running a version from their Linux vendor's repository, they'll either never see or won't see in the near future the zero filling behavior.
Forget about that.
But yeah, the problem.
main problem is the problem is the fact that they will probably gain a new issue in the release. For example, if they use an already released version and do not update, it is just not something that wasn't fixed in that version, and that was fixed in a later version. If we zero fill, it will become a problem for the already released versions.
But isn't that true of like anything that we patch as a security fix?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
if you're running a version that's not fixed, it's not fixed.
No, because probably it's not going to be a problem in new code. And if we zero fill and people come to rely on that, and that person updates the package, for example, some module, or just does a fresh npm install things, and a new model gets pulled in that relies on zero fill, it will become a problem just because of the zero fill.
Yeah, I mean, it's conceivable that someone will take, code where they call the buffer constructor, then execute buffer.fill, and they'll just remove buffer.fill if they
Yes.
know that we're zero filling. In theory, that's a possibility.
Well, yeah, of course that's possible. But my question is, how long do we say that's a problem? Like, do we have to wait 2 years before we can go ahead and flip everything to zero fill?
Well, this is the question.
I
Because
also hear like
if
from
buffer's ever
most
going to get
people.
Go
Sorry, please continue.
How long should we wait since when?
since today,
So here, look, this is a really heavily used API, and we've only recently introduced new options to people that we're encouraging people to use. This is a massive ship to be turning, and so I opt for greater patience, and we can do what we want with documentation, with encouraging people to use the new APIs. But anything that really is heavy-handed, I think we should avoid, and we should just be patient, defer. And if you feel strongly enough that this is a problem in the ecosystem, then you could go around filing pull requests. You could maybe even set up a GitHub bot to go and do it for you. But I think it's unreasonable to expect that the ecosystem's going to turn on a dime here, because it's just such a massive used API.
And this is why we introduce things like the pending deprecation, because this is something that we've either through the command line argument or through an environment variable. Someone running in a CI environment can enable this and just see it as during development time, that an end user won't ever see it, won't have to deal with. At the same time, we have conversations going on with various like linter tools, like ESLint. There's a conversation going on about whether this is out there. There's several modules, ESLint plugins that check for this. Standard is now checking for this. I think that there is a kind of a social engineering exercise that we can go through over the next year to reduce the reliance on new buffer, and then revisit the question of whether we do a set deprecation date that's not behind a flag. So I definitely have to agree with what Rod just said.
Go ahead, Nikita.
After Darrell's comment, I thought maybe just the opt-in deprecate and some other signals in the documentation and in the release notes that it's better to move to the new API, but without setting some specific dates for that, will be enough for version 8, and we can revisit the random fill or scheduling in some later version, like 9. By the way, the opt-in deprecate is the most uncontroversial column in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Most or least?
Most uncontroversial.
Oh, uncontroversial. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, me not being very. The fact that Sorry, just ignore this. You write in the comments.
I think we have another really big issue to talk about, and there's no way we're going to achieve resolution on this in this meeting. So I wonder if the thing to do is to make an action item in the notes that we should make sure that there is a PR open for each of the 4 options that we talked about, and try to come to resolution in GitHub, or at least like be prepared to vote next week. Brian is saying that he's skeptical how many people would actually use the flag for it to be effective, and you are definitely not the first person to express skepticism.
Yep.
Look, but I think what Rich is saying here is right, Brian, that we can have these discussions in the separate threads because we're conflating so many things into one discussion. So we can actually pick this off by the least controversial to the most. So maybe the action item is to just start with the least controversial there. And so if somebody wants to put their hand up to open up over us if there's not already one there for
There
that
already
least
is one. James opened it today or yesterday.
Okay, let's get this off the agenda and put that PR on the agenda and try and get that one solved.
Sorry, real quick. I feel like all the options we're discussing are, I'm viewing them as like the option for indefinitely, or most of the options are being viewed that way. Like, I personally want to see buffer eventually become this specific thing, but I also don't care if we have to jump through some hoops along the way. So how should we discuss that? Like, the spreadsheet we got, super helpful, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I could say, well, this is okay, but also if we took this route after, like, what if we random fill for now and then zero fill eventually type thing? Does that make sense?
Well, maybe you can document in a markdown file of like just a few paragraphs or a few bullet points what you think the ideal route is, and propose that, and we can like use that as a jumping off point or something. I don't know what else to say.
No, that sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on. Is that okay? James, are you going to interject?
No, I was just going to say, we definitely should do the least controversial one first, which is definitely this flag. But if we are going to switch to either random fill or zero fill, we should do it before 8 comes out. Which I'm trying to land all of the December majors for 8 by April 4th.
Yeah, all of
Would
these
you-
things need to be decided by next week's meeting. I mean, like,
I'm not sure I think random fill is a major, simply because right now you could say it's already random filled by the system in a way.
Right. Well,
Now, zero fill
if
definitely.
we're not going to do that, if we're going to switch to a zero fill, then
Yeah.
we need to have that decided. So
Cool.
You could make an argument that zero fill's not even a major. If we wanted to, we could do that partway through. I think we could justify that.
The
In current, anyway.
main
There's-
reason why it could be why any of those seven major and sorry, the random fill and the zero fill could be considered similar major is because of the performance drop, but I think that it was mentioned that it is not so significant for real use, for real applications.
I will say zero fill is significantly faster than the random fill.
But
Do
the
we
idea
have
of random
numbers on
filling
zero
was-
fill versus nothing?
The idea behind random filling was that we pick a random value at startup and then use that instead of zero to
Yes.
fill. But
Yeah.
I can't see that being much slower than zero filling.
It's not much. It's not a whole lot.
I think the way we're doing it could be improved too. Right now we're just using .fill, right? Whereas if we
Yeah.
just
Because
stored it and then
it was the least disruptive as far as code is concerned. Just add a fill. I mean, I could do it down at the native layer, just a little more disruptive of a change.
all right, let's take this to GitHub if nobody minds.
Yeah. And so if the people driving these different issues, if there is urgency, as James said, then maybe feel free to take it to email as well to get the CTC members engaged. That's fine.
Just just a reminder, April 4th is my target date. If it needs to slip after that, then fine. But that's I'm trying to get all the December majors wrapped up by then. So
Okay, let's move on. So skipping on to this next one, which is issue.
I'm sorry, what was the date again?
April 4th.
Major. Thanks.
That's a bit over a week and a half. Sorry. So the next issue is issue number 11975, which is adding support for ABI stable Node API. This has been in the works for a long time. Microsoft folks have been putting a lot of work into this. A lot of help from IBM as well. And this is a way of exporting an API to C and C++ programmers that has a stable interface, both binary and application interface. And we have Aranesh here from Microsoft, who is going to walk us through the status of it and where we might go from here. Welcome, Aranesh.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Rod. So we, as Rod pointed out, this project has been going on for a while with collaboration with folks from IBM and others. So today we have submitted a PR, and this ABI stable module API, we are calling it NAPI, Node API for short. And the current state is experimental. What the PR does today is it has this feature is guarded by a runtime flag. So if there's no runtime flags provided, the NAPI modules will not be loaded. So this is just a first version that we wanted to kind of come out with and have the community look at it and provide us feedback, and also expand it to the module developers to kind of try and play with it and give us feedback. The coverage, from what we can tell based on the top 30 dependent native module, is that the V8 APIs, which are used in 5 or more modules, we have 100% coverage of a NAPI API equivalent. So we feel pretty good about where the API is today. But again, it is not complete as we would want it to be. But I think it was a good opportunity for us to kind of bring us to a wider audience and start getting feedback for its design, its API gaps that still exist, and performance characteristics and things of that nature. So I can take any questions if you have.
No, not a question here, but just a comment to kind of follow up. I mean, part of the intent here is to definitely get this into 8.0.0 as an experimental, with the idea in mind that we know that it's not anywhere close to being perfect or done yet. So there are quite a few things about the API design and additional things that need to be added, or and I already see that the feedback on the PR is actually is already pretty extensive, and thank you for those of you that have already reviewed it. But the goal is to land it while it is still early, so we can start getting that feedback. So it's definitely not going to be 100% perfect right out the gate.
Can you just answer something? I did give it a brief review, but I miss it's basically converting a whole bunch of stuff to void pointers. How does it ensure the safety of what's being passed isn't incorrect?
I can take that one. There's there's type checking done in most of the APIs to verify that the NAPI values passed in are the expected type of the API.
Okay, that's what those type defs are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess, one key question is, does anyone object to this going into 8.0? As
Well, I
experimental.
don't object, but it's a pretty big pull request, and expecting it to be completely reviewed before the 10th of April, I don't know. Seems a little optimistic.
Why don't we set a date? Because the actual 8.0 release is not going to be cut until the last week of April. So if we can set a target, maybe a week before then, have it reviewed, and if things are looking good, we can get it landed. Since its landing is experimental and it's a Semver minor.
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. It's not a Semver major, and I don't believe there's really any material changes to any internals. It's just more about exporting stuff. I think that's right.
By the way, it doesn't have a similar tag on the GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. We'll get that added.
Symbol. Okay, and we need to confirm that it is Semver minor as well in terms of the current ABI. I presume it doesn't impact the current ABI at all, but I want to confirm that.
When in doubt, go with the Semver tag.
Yeah.
I have a question. Does anyone who's working on this see a path to a non-difficult path to backing NAN with this API, so that NAN can interact with NAPI rather than directly with the V8 API, or is that going to be too difficult since NAN is too V8 looking? Basically, has anyone tried that or thought about doing that?
We haven't tried converting NAN. There is a C++ wrapper, which is inspired by NAN that accompanies this, that's header only. And during the design of that, Kupo, I guess, who works on NAN, has been giving feedback. There's been some discussion about calling that API or that header, the wrapper, NAN 3.0, but that's still under discussion right now.
So, okay, because it might be, I can imagine there's going to be lots of, this is going to be like the buffer changes. Shifting a huge ecosystem across to this is going to be very painful. But if there was a transition phase where you can still write against NAN and it ends up compiling against this, and perhaps you get a longer stretch of ABI compliance using NAN.
That's true. And our instinct is that we should be able to build some kind of tooling to make the migration from NAN to our new wrapper fairly simple. But that work hasn't been done yet.
Okay, I guess that can be done once this is out and in the wild.
That is the intention.
Cool. Just as long as it's being thought of, that's cool. Any questions or comments about it? Okay, well, please review if you have the bandwidth to poke at this code. Maybe even look at the examples if you haven't been following much of this. Examples should be instructional. We have another item that is not on the agenda, but it is related because it's another big change that would be nice to get into version 8, which is the async hooks PR to bring the current code up to speed with Trevor's latest work, and this is to be considered something close to final async hooks. So Trevor, do you want to tell us about that PR?
Yeah. I had the old PR, and I went through, took a little bit of time off from it, came back with fresh advice, rewrote a good chunk of it. I feel like it's a lot cleaner as it is now, but I still would like as much feedback as possible. I've already been getting some feedback. Thank you, Anna and Ben, or maybe that's the other related one. Anyway, so yes, I would just like people to jump on and look at it and tell me what I did wrong and how I can improve it. I've tried to make it as least invasive as possible, regardless of how it looks.
And Torsten Lorenz has put a lot of work into testing for this as well, so there's a bunch of tests that come along with it.
Yes, there's a whole bunch of tests. whole load of tests. I added, so yeah, Torsten did a huge number of tests specifically for async wrap. Right now they're in test/async hooks. And then I added, Ben, you're going to love this, an environment variable you can set when you run the tests that will enable a whole bunch of async hooks to automatically run with each test, just to make sure that there are no operations in any of the tests that would cause async hooks to fail. So it's like a free second layer of tests. And then I have added additional tests that focus on some lower level stuff as well. So yeah, trying like really trying to test the crap out of this because of how much stuff it touches. I realized that there may be a lot of uncertainty in accepting this, so I wanted to alleviate those concerns.
Hey, Trevor, quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there's been some additional stuff around tracing and promises in V8. And correct me if I'm not describing it properly. But I'm under the impression that there's some stuff that async hooks could potentially, for lack of a better way of describing it, hook into for promise hooks. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
So do you have any update on that? And like, is that something you've been managing to look into at all? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that API won't be in 8, so we can't hook into any promise related functionality in 8, but I think it's the next version. Well, it'll definitely be in 9, and as soon as it lands in master, then I will begin work on integration with the promise hooks. They worked with me a lot, and they put up with me quite a bit to make sure that that API was what I needed in order to properly hook into and get all the information needed.
So technically this isn't, I don't believe it should be a Semver major, and it's still experimental, but it'd be good to get this in 8, if not at the beginning, then early, and then we can stabilize async hooks and move towards turning off experimental.
Hey, Trevor, go for it.
I was going to say, how close do you think it is to landing, Trevor?
That depends on what everybody else thinks. I need to add docs and move around some tests so that they conform. But I've been my first commit with async wrap landed in September 2013. So I've had some time to go over this since then. And I feel like it's pretty solid, but I always enjoy more eyes to point out any easier ways of doing things or anything like that.
So at NodeSource, we've been hammering on this a bit and building some abstractions on top of it to make it more easy to consume. And I think we're pretty confident that this is the form that it should take for going public, but it really does need review from other collaborators to basically review the code, but also review the API and be happy that this is the way we want to go.
Yeah, I personally am happy with the public API. I think it's Torsten has shown that it's broad enough that you can create a lot of specialized modules from it that give you what you need. My biggest concern and what I want people to focus on in the PR is how it touches all of core code. Since it traces everything async and Node is one massive async machine, it therefore touches almost all of Node in some way. So yeah, the making sure that it doesn't negatively affect core in unexpected ways is the main reason I would like more eyeballs.
Given that, like I said, April 4th, I'm going to be trying to lock down the December majors. And the reason for that is because I'm going to start a process of release candidates. And obviously with release candidates, we need to try to keep it as close as possible to what we're actually releasing. So I'm going to be limiting to just patches and probably limited even Semver minors. Given how extensive this thing is, the earliest we can get those reviews, the better. So I can get it into the early release candidates. So if we can get folks to commit to taking a look before the 4th, I really appreciate it.
Okay, so Ben has another big pull request. 11431. Activate inspector with _debug process. Yeah, that's another 1,000-line change one.
Hey,
And
Trevor,
I do
just
think, oh, sorry, I do think it's critical that this one goes in before 8.0.
I was going to mention on kind of related to that, according to the V8 blog, the Promise Hook API is in 5.7. So it will be in the first version of 8, but I guess we don't have that in master yet, right? Because we're still waiting for some tests to pass.
Great. Then I will actually start looking at that now, and I would consider that a patch level change, because that will technically set apart from. That won't touch core in any way, since it'll be hooking directly into the existing V8 API. So if we want to land this, and then I supply the patch for the promise hooks afterwards, after 8, I think that would be acceptable, but that is technically up to everybody else.
It sounds fine for me.
Okay, let's move on unless anyone wants to hold this up with anything pressing. Nope. Okay, let's move on to public Q&A. I've asked already on the live stream. I'll do it again. We only have, I think it's 4 watches. And it's caught up to my question now. And there's no questions, so I believe we can probably just move on. And talking about upcoming meetings in the calendar, somebody has thoughtfully put these in. The Collaborator Summit is on May 4th to 5th. Oh, sorry, I'm going to unmute myself in the live stream so I don't have an echo. That's going to be in, around JSConf EU, Collaborator Summit. If you're a collaborator and interested in getting involved, even if you're not a collaborator, I think you'd be welcome there. The TC39 meetup on the May the 22nd. Is that that's Miles? You're championing that one, aren't you?
Yeah, I can quickly talk about that. A whole bunch of you were on the call last week, so you know the spiel, but I just pitched again. 23rd to the 25th is the TC39 meeting happening at Google in New York. We have rented out a space at Google and are having catered a meal for people from the Node CTC, TSC, as well as the board to come and meet the TC39 and just, get to know each other. Biggest thing I'm interested in seeing happening is just, a couple, relationships getting built and, better communication between the two bodies. And the impression that I got today at the TC39 meeting was a lot of people are actually really excited to meet various people from Node, and also a handful of people who are pretty excited about the TC39, working with other working groups and other communities. So I actually think it's a really good thing that we can do working with them to just kind of like set the bar for that.
So this is very good. Thank you for setting this up. I'm going to be there, but they've already met me. It'd be really great. I don't know travel's always be a pain. It'd be really great if those of you who have not had prior experience or chance to talk with the TC39 members to get to this meeting and meet. It's a great group of people. They do care about what we need for Node, and they are very anxious to reach out and talk. But we need to do our part as well and reach out. So please, if at all you can get there, please make an effort to do so.
And just for what it's worth, we have 11 people right now, 6 TC39 members and 5 representatives from Node. But many of the people who are coming from Node are people who have or will be interacting with the TC39 anyways. So I would love to see that grow. Also, if it stays small, maybe we'll just all go to a restaurant or something instead. I'll keep you up to date.
Okay, in other things happening, we've got TSC meeting this week. It's a couple of days or a day, depending on where you are. And diagnostics the same day, an hour later. CTC meeting next week will shift again, and I believe it's going to be 9 hours after this slot. So that's 4 p.m. UTC, March the 29th. And I think that's all. So unless there's anything else that anyone needs to mention publicly, then we'll close it down. No, so goodbye, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the stream, and thanks for joining us in the meeting, everyone.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.
Good night. Thanks.
Bye.